and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita.
I'm Ron.
And I'm Jean Marie.
Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. We will be recounting some of our most memorable interviews from the last 4 years on today's show. That's right.
It's the Oscars.
It's our 4th anniversary.
That too.
Join us as we head down memory lane and celebrate our 4th year of podcasting. To get started, let's talk numbers.
Okay. I like the number 47.
I like 32.
Okay.
But
Ron?
Ron, do you have a number?
Favorite?
Yeah. Yeah.
13.
13.
Okay.
All right.
Lucky 13.
Well, out of all those numbers, we're not going to use them.
Okay.
But so far,
Okay.
so far we have posted 209 episodes. We have interviewed 151 guests. We have listeners in at least 54 countries, and we have 250,000 listeners. But today, as I've said, we will recall some of our most memorable episodes.
Because we don't have time to read 100 or 209 episodes.
No.
Okay.
Well, you know what? I'd like to talk about the episodes with guests who continue to inspire me.
Okay.
We've spoken with so many people, and each of them displayed such strength, and they also want to help others by sharing their own experiences. There are a few guests that stand out in my mind for just how inspirational they were. When I think of a motivator, a mover and shaker,
Mm-hmm.
as you'll have it, there's one name that comes to mind, and that would be Travis Mills. I think you guys remember that interview.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Travis is a military veteran. He's also a quad amputee. He continues to support other veterans through his foundations and all of his programs. Then in studio, we had 2 guests who were also real life heroes and lifesavers. You remember Reuben Rodriguez and Sophie Chang?
Oh,
Sure,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the 2 that saved the life of a fellow passenger named Bill Hennessy when he collapsed after boarding a metro train.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I thought it was amazing that they all came together for our taping in person. I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it was the first time they had all met since that day.
Right.
And there were a lot of tears and smiles.
Yeah, that
on
was that
day.
really was a good one.
That was, yeah. I agree completely, Ron. In talking about unsung heroes, or those were hopefully sung heroes, but when we consider the idea of healthcare heroes, we should also definitely put at the top of that list Agnes from Australia. She is a superhero, and she needs her own superhero costume and cape because she was a data analyst when her youngest child was born with sickle cell. And at that time, she and her husband didn't even know that they were carriers for the gene for sickle cell because they didn't do blood testing in Australia. And she returned to school to learn everything she could about the disease. And she, became a registered nurse and then got her master's in nursing. And since then, she's co-founded and is the executive director for the Australian Sickle Cell Advocacy Program, which now assists over 5,000 other families in Australia and helps them navigate the world of sickle cell disease.
Yeah, she is an amazing, and now she just recently published a children's book.
Oh, yes, we have it.
Yeah, we purchased one of her books that we can drop off at the
Children's Hospital.
Children's Hospital
Yes.
downtown. Right.
So she's her ability to spread advocacy and affect change there in Australia has been monumental, and we were privileged to, we're privileged to talk to all of our guests, but these guests, yeah, they definitely stand out.
Well, Jean and Ron, I would agree with your assessments that those individuals and their interviews are truly inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the guests that had such complex illnesses that it took years to diagnose?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take Christine, I believe.
Hosterman?
Last name is pronounced
Hosterman?
Hosterman.
Hosterman?
Hosterman,
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah, she's the co-founder of Find Your Rare.
Mm-hmm.
And she spoke with us about how difficult it has been to get a diagnosis for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and how that diagnosis led to other diagnoses, including brittle cornea syndrome and the BRCA gene for breast cancer. Those are the latest two.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And if you recall, during our interview, you did mention how you picture complex diagnoses as being like an overspooled fishing reel.
She pictures
You don't know
everything.
where to start to unravel the different aspects of the
Yep.
condition,
Yep.
but you do know it's all connected.
Right.
Christine's work with patient advocacy for herself and others is something that I found to be truly inspirational.
That's it exactly, Ron. Yeah, I don't know if any of the fishermen or any of our listeners are fishermen, but that's exactly how I look at a complex diagnosis. That you know that it's all connected because you put the line on there, but you can't find the start and you can't find the end, and it takes a lot of energy and time to tease through that and straighten it all out. Another guest who had a hard time getting a diagnosis was Frank Rivera. Remember when he was misdiagnosed with lung cancer?
Oh, yeah.
And then by the time he was correctly diagnosed with sarcoidosis, it had spread to almost every organ in his body.
Yeah.
I mean,
And he had undergone chemo. And everything.
yes,
Yeah.
he took his experiences and he founded Sarcoidosis of Long Island.
Yep, it's amazing what people can do. And unfortunately, although they're very rare, medical errors can be costly and affect a patient's overall health and recovery time. I'm reminded of our interview with Brian Talley. Brian, a military veteran, had a staph infection in his spine that went undiagnosed for years. He kept going to the hospital. They would say, you just have back pain. Here's some anti-inflammatories.
Right,
yes.
right.
And he ended up with severe damage to his spine and some other organs as the disease actually ate away at him from the inside. And he took that and decided that he was going to advocate for himself and other veterans.
Right. And once Brian had the treatment, or his surgery needed, he wanted to ensure accountability in the VA system. And he worked tirelessly to get the Talley bill passed. And his work on that bill will help protect other veterans from medical negligence at the VA. Now, again, talk about inspiring.
Yes.
Just the great work he's doing.
Yes, indeed. That is one Marine that leaves the motto, leave no injured troop behind, right at the top.
Right. And I know our audio editor, Jack Scarrow, he mentioned that he had a favorite episode that he would put in the most surprising and learn something new today category. Jack found our interview with Derek Canis surprising and informative. Derek, otherwise known as D-Rec, is a DJ and renowned AIDS activist. And if you guys recall, D-Rec was born with a unique heart defect called transposition of the great arteries. And since infancy, he has had to have numerous heart procedures and pacemakers implanted. In addition, he had to have a blood transfusion when he was an infant. And unfortunately, that blood that he received contained the human immunodeficiency virus, which then later developed into AIDS. And Jack said that he was surprised to learn about the spread of viruses through blood transfusions. And I guess it's similar to, needle sharing and things, blood spreads. We've also discussed a case where rabies was spread to 4 patients who received organ transplants from an infected individual. And Jack's own grandfather was infected and later succumbed to hepatitis and liver disease from an unscreened blood transfusion in the 1980s.
Right.
And if you recall, D-Rec is helping to break the stereotypes and stigma regarding AIDS, and he encourages everyone to get tested for HIV.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's a mover and shaker as well.
Yep.
And while we're on the topic of breaking stereotypes, I'd like to give a shout out to the guests that have shown us that mental health is every bit as important as physical health.
That's an excellent point, Lita. Were you thinking about anyone in particular? I know we just did a follow-up interview with Craig Lewis, he was a guy from living in the cave in Mexico.
Craig is one for sure. He's living with the trauma of Munchausen's by proxy, and to this day, he is hesitant to even seek out medical care after decades of false medical diagnoses put on him by his parents. But also Frank King, who continues to give TED Talks on suicide awareness, and Corey Burris, who, in complete suicide at the age of 17, survived with horrific face scarring from a shotgun blast to his head. And these brave souls, they know the pain that exists in mental illness, but they're willing to stand up and tell the world their stories with an imploring message to everyone: ask for help.
Yeah, it's okay to ask for help. Everyone needs help once in a while.
For sure they do, and I completely agree with that message. Sometimes a person has pain that is not so obvious to those around them, and many have learned to hide that pain.
Right. And you know what? That brings me to my favorite theme of our podcast. Not all diagnoses are obvious. There are many conditions with no obvious outward signs. For example, conditions that result in chronic pain may be difficult for others to understand. It can be disheartening for someone who is suffering to be dealing with, which is the most difficult part for the patient, is they're often considered just malingering, or, they have the so-called invisible illnesses. Fibromyalgia jumps out at me as one example. We talked with Crystal Kent, an Army veteran, Norman Hanley, a Marine Corps veteran, Pamela Jessen from British Columbia,
Arushi La Jolla,
okay, from
Jaipur, Rajasthan, India.
Oh, okay. Go ahead and take it away, Lita.
and Jason Herderick from Toronto. The overwhelming message from each of them was, we have a diagnosis, but the diagnosis doesn't define us. They not only continue in their personal lives with chronic pain, but they are also strong advocates for others with fibro around the world.
Amen to that. Patient advocacy is a trait that most of our guests have. And I think in doing so, they not only help others, but I also think it helps them to deal with their own pain. And Jason has POTS as well as fibromyalgia, doesn't he?
Yep. He and I are both share that rare diagnosis of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And sometimes just going from, all the time. If you go from one position to another, such as like standing or sitting to standing, it's the biggest challenge of the day because you get dizzy and can have a syncope and black out.
I agree completely. And I think Jean Marie would be a prime example of how advocacy work helps overcome personal difficulties like chronic pain, brain fog, and depression. The fact that she is still working so hard on this podcast
is shocking, utterly shocking.
To get the stories of others out to the world, even though she herself is a POTS warrior, is a testament to that fact.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to say this. When I first started doing this with you guys,
mm-hmm.
I knew Jean had an accident, but I didn't know how severe it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, now, even when I'm in studio, it's, you really can't tell.
Mm-hmm.
So going from where she was to where she is now is just amazing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, if you were here yesterday, you'd be like, oh my gosh. Yeah, because I still choke on food.
There are bad days still.
And yesterday was a rough one. I was choking on soup. And I'm like, how does someone choke on soup? But yeah, it can be done.
It was those noodles.
Yeah.
Well, what I would like to give a sincere thank you to each and every one of our guests and our listeners for teaching me so much over these last 4 years.
I second that.
I third it? No, it passes. It's now on the record. I guess I will solidify this quorum and recommend that we close this episode and put out requests to our listeners. Call to action.
Yes.
We are now looking for guests for our next season, starting in a few months, I think in the fall.
Yes.
Okay. so the fall of 2022. So if you have an hour to share with us, we would love to have you on the show and have you tell us your story, because you're going to reach many. You can use our email or go to our website for details on becoming a guest on our show. Mom, would you like to tell them how they can reach us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If our listeners have any questions or comments about today's show, if they want to be a guest, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com. We have a website, PodcastDX.com. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Pinterest, TikTok, and Instagram.
And if you have a moment to spare, please give us a review wherever you get your podcast. And please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast.
Till next week.